For 45 years, Priscilla Presley has guarded the most explosive secrets in rock and roll history. Secrets about late-night phone calls from mysterious women, Elvis's dangerous obsessions, violent confrontations behind closed doors, and betrayals that cut deeper than any tabloid ever imagined. Tonight, she reveals the raw, unfiltered truth about their passionate, destructive love affair and the dark forces that ultimately destroyed the king of rock and roll. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see the most famous couple in music history. The first time I caught Elvis with another woman, I wasn't heartbroken, I was terrified. Because the woman wasn't just any starlet or fan. She was someone who wielded power over him in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. Someone who knew secrets that could destroy everything we had built together. It was 1968, and I had returned early from a shopping trip in Memphis when I heard voices coming from Elvis's private office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see Elvis sitting across from a woman I had never seen before. She was older, maybe in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that screamed money and influence. "You know what happens if you don't cooperate, Elvis," she was saying, her voice cold as winter. "The photographs from Vegas, the recordings from that hotel room in Miami, your little experiments with the medications Dr. Nichols has been providing." Elvis's hands were shaking as he lit another cigarette. "I've done everything you've asked. The performances, the movies, keeping my mouth shut about the Colonel's real business dealings." "Not everything," she replied, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. "There's one more thing we need from you. And this time, it involves your pretty little wife." That's when I realized that our entire marriage had been orchestrated by people who saw us as nothing more than pawns in a game I didn't even understand. This woman, who I later learned was connected to some very dangerous people in Las Vegas, had been pulling strings in Elvis's life for years. The envelope contained photographs of me that had been taken without my knowledge. Pictures of me shopping, having lunch with friends, even some taken through our bedroom window at Graceland. The message was clear. They were watching us, and they could get to us whenever they wanted. "Your wife has been asking too many questions about your finances," the woman continued. "About where certain payments are going. About why you're performing so many shows for so little profit. She needs to stop." Elvis looked up at me through the crack in the door, and I realized he had known I was there the entire time. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. He was being blackmailed, controlled, manipulated by people who had been documenting his every weakness and mistake for years. "Leave Priscilla out of this," he said quietly. "She doesn't know anything." The woman smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I had ever seen. "She will if you don't handle this properly. One way or another, Mr. Presley, your wife will learn to keep her curiosity in check." That night, Elvis came to our bedroom and held me tighter than he ever had before. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my ear. "I'm so sorry for what I've brought into our lives." That was when he told me about the others, not just the female fans or the actresses, but the people who really controlled him. The shadowy figures who had been documenting his private life, collecting compromising material, and using it to turn him into their personal cash machine. "They own me, Priscilla," he said, his voice breaking. "And now they're threatening to own you too." The first time Elvis hit me, it wasn't out of anger. It was out of pure, desperate fear. We had been arguing about the mysterious phone calls that came at all hours of the night, the strange men who showed up at Graceland without appointments, and the way he had been acting like a caged animal for weeks. "You don't understand what you're asking me to do," he screamed, his face twisted with anguish. "You want me to tell you the truth? The truth will get us both killed." I had pushed too far, demanded too many answers about the bruises that kept appearing on his arms, the way he jumped every time the phone rang, the reason he had started sleeping with a loaded gun under his pillow. His hand connected with my cheek, so hard that I saw stars. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the look of horror on his face when he realized what he had done. "Oh, God," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Oh, God, Priscilla, I'm becoming him." "Becoming who?" I asked, holding my burning cheek. When he told me about his father's business partner, a man named Tommy Marconi, who had ties to organized crime families in Chicago and New York. Marconi had been involved in Elvis's career from almost the beginning, providing the muscle and the connections that Colonel Parker needed to build the Elvis empire. But Marconi's help came with a price. He wanted Elvis to launder money through his tours and movie deals. He wanted access to the high-profile parties where politicians and business leaders could be compromised. And he wanted Elvis to keep his mouth shut about the various illegal activities that were being conducted under the cover of his fame. "He beats his wife," Elvis said, still on his knees, still horrified by what he had done to me. "I've seen the bruises. I've heard her crying on the phone. And tonight, when I struck you, I saw his face looking back at me in the mirror. The violence wasn't just physical. Elvis had been living in a state of constant psychological warfare for years. The people controlling him would arrange accidents for anyone who asked too many questions. They would threaten the people he loved. They would remind him daily that his fame was built on their foundation, and they could tear it all down whenever they chose. "They made me watch once," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "A journalist who was writing an expose about Colonel Parker's business practices. They took him to a warehouse in Memphis, and I can't get the images out of my head, Priscilla. I can't sleep without seeing what they're capable of." The worst part was that Elvis had started using violence as a way to feel some sense of control. In his powerless life, he would get into bar fights, attack photographers, even turn his rage on the people he loved most. The gentle man I had married was being systematically destroyed by the fear and guilt of his complicity in things he couldn't escape. "I'm losing myself," he said that night. "Every day I become a little more like them, and I'm terrified that one day I'll become so much like them that you won't be able to love me anymore." But the truth was even darker than his fears, because I was already planning my escape, already documenting everything I had learned, already preparing to expose the entire network of corruption and violence that had consumed the man I loved. Just didn't know yet that they were planning to stop me before I could. The betrayal didn't come from Elvis. It came from someone I trusted more than my own family. Someone who had been in our inner circle for years. Someone who knew every secret, every weakness, every plan I had made to expose the truth about what was happening to my husband Dot. It was my best friend, Sandra, who had been feeding information to Elvis's handlers from the very beginning. I discovered her treachery in the most devastating way possible. I had confided in her about my plan to contact the FBI about the money laundering and the threats against Elvis. I had shown her the photographs I had been secretly taking, the documents I had been copying, the audio recordings I had made of some of Elvis's more compromising phone conversations. "You have to be careful, Priscilla," she had said, playing her role perfectly. "These are dangerous people. Maybe you should wait until you have more evidence." But she had been stalling me, feeding my information back to Tommy Marconi and his associates, buying them time to cover their tracks and eliminate any evidence of their activities. I found out when I came home early from a charity function and heard Sandra on the phone in my own kitchen, using my own telephone to betray me. "She's got photographs of the Vegas meetings," Sandra was saying, "and she's been recording Elvis's phone calls. You need to handle this before she goes to the authorities." The conversation that followed revealed the extent of her betrayal. She had been planted in my life years earlier, specifically to monitor my activities and report back on anything that might threaten their operation. My marriage, my friendships, Even my relationship with my own daughter, all of it had been contaminated by their manipulation. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Sandra wasn't just a spy. She was also Elvis's lover. Had been for over 2 years. He's completely dependent on me now, she continued. The emotional manipulation is working perfectly. He thinks I'm the only person who understands him, the only one who accepts his darker impulses. Priscilla suspects nothing. Standing in my own hallway, listening to my best friend describe how she had systematically destroyed my marriage while reporting my every move to criminals, I felt something inside me break that would never heal. When Sandra hung up the phone and turned around to find me standing there, the mask finally fell away completely. The woman I had trusted with my deepest fears and secrets smiled at me with pure, cold calculation. How long? I asked. From the beginning, she replied. Did you really think it was a coincidence that we met at that charity event? That I was so eager to become your friend? That I was always available to listen to your problems with Elvis? The setup had been elaborate and long-term. They had studied my psychological profile, identified my vulnerabilities, and crafted the perfect friend to exploit them. Sandra had been trained to encourage my suspicions about Elvis, while simultaneously reporting everything back to his handlers. Why? I whispered. Because you were getting too close to the truth, she said. And because Elvis needed to be emotionally dependent on someone who worked for us. Someone who could control him through love instead of just fear. That night, when Elvis came home, I confronted him with everything I had learned. His reaction told me that he had known about Sandra's true identity for months, but had been too broken, too addicted to her manipulation, to end it. She makes me feel like I'm worth something, he said, unable to meet my eyes. With you, I feel like a disappointment. With her, I feel like a king. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over. Not because of the affairs, or the lies, or even the violence, but because the man I had loved had been so thoroughly broken that he preferred the comfort of his own destruction to the difficult work of becoming whole again. The final secret, the one that ultimately killed Elvis, wasn't about money or violence or even betrayal. It was about a child. A child that would have exposed everything and everyone involved in the conspiracy that had consumed his life. In early 1977, a young woman named Maria Santos contacted Elvis directly, bypassing all his usual handlers and security. She claimed to be pregnant with his child, but that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that she had documented proof of the entire criminal network that had been controlling him. Her father had been a bookkeeper for Tommy Marconi's organization before he was murdered for asking too many questions. Before he died, he had hidden detailed financial records, photographs, and recorded conversations that proved the extent of the money laundering, blackmail, and violence that had been conducted under the cover of Elvis's fame. He wanted insurance, Maria told Elvis during their secret meeting at a hotel outside Memphis. He knew they would eventually kill him, so he documented everything. And he told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should find Elvis Presley and tell him the truth. The documents Maria possessed were explosive. They detailed how Elvis's tours had been used to move money for organized crime families. They showed how politicians and business leaders had been compromised at parties at Graceland. They proved that several unexplained deaths and disappearances over the years had been murders designed to protect the operation. But most importantly, they revealed the true identity of Colonel Parker not as Elvis's manager, but as a front man for a criminal organization that had been using Elvis as their primary money laundering vehicle for over a decade. Elvis was faced with an impossible choice. He could expose everything, destroy the people who had controlled him, and finally be free, but doing so would almost certainly result in his death, and possibly the death of everyone he loved, including his daughter, Lisa Marie. Or he could continue living as their prisoner, watching as they used his fame to commit increasingly serious crimes. "I have to do the right thing," he told me during our last real conversation. "Even if it kills me, I have to try to stop them." Elvis arranged to meet with FBI agents in Las Vegas on August 18, 1977. He was going to turn over all of Maria's evidence and testify about everything he had witnessed and been forced to participate in over the years. But on August 16th, 2 days before the meeting, Elvis was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. The official cause of death was heart failure brought on by drug abuse. But I know the truth. The drugs that killed him weren't recreational. They were a deliberate overdose, administered by someone who had access to Graceland, someone he trusted. Within hours of his death, Maria Santos disappeared. Her body was found 3 days later in the Mississippi River. The death was ruled a suicide. All of her father's documents vanished from the safety deposit box where she had kept them. And Tommy Marconi, Colonel Parker, Sandra, and all the others who had profited from Elvis's destruction simply moved on to their next victim. Elvis didn't die from fame, or drugs, or a broken heart. He died because he finally found the courage to do the right thing. And there were people who couldn't afford to let him live long enough to follow through. For 45 years, I've carried the weight of knowing how Elvis really died and why. I've watched as the world celebrated a sanitized version of his legacy, while the truth rotted in silence. But the people who killed him are mostly dead now, and I'm running out of time to tell his real story. Elvis Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was a good man who was destroyed by evil people who saw his talent as nothing more than a tool for their own enrichment. He died trying to do the right thing, and he deserves to be remembered for his courage, not just his music. The full evidence of what really happened to Elvis is still out there, hidden in safety deposit boxes and buried in forgotten files. If you want to help expose the truth about the biggest cover-up in entertainment history, subscribe to our investigation newsletter. Together, we can finally give the king the justice he deserves. Join the investigation. Uncover the truth. Get justice for Elvis.